Everybody, I'm Victoria Thomas, Director of English Studies at University College here at Washington University in St. Louis, together with my teaching assistant, Max Klapow, who's an undergraduate senior. And we're very excited to be a part of this panel. And I'd just like to thank Philip and Tim for explaining their proposal to us. It sounds wonderful. Really great work, guys. It's just inspiring. Today, we'd like to share with you our project incorporating positive psychology into a critical and research writing class that I was teaching at WashU's Prison Education Project at Missouri Eastern Correctional Center. Max was a junior in another class I teach on writing about the law, where I had talked about my PUP experiences. At the end of the semester, Max asked about volunteer opportunities to tutor the PUP students, telling me that as a psych major, he was interested in the ways in which they might be helped by positive psychology. We are very protective of our students in the PUP. We treat them as we do all other students at WashU, but with triple the care because we know that they're living through such a traumatic experience. So our conversation went something like this. Well, what's the worst that can happen if students learn about positive psychology and it doesn't help them?
I said, that's it. It doesn't work.
I said, prove it.
And I told her to read these.
I said, oh, that's a lot. Can you give me the upsides?
So positive psychology is a field within psychology that studies the positive aspects of our experiences and how we can promote them. Positive interventions can increase someone's overall sense of well-being and life satisfaction, help people be healthy and resilient during really difficult life experiences, improve their self-efficacy, and in the classroom, facilitate a positive learning community. Research also indicates that at their worst, positive interventions are not harmful, they're just ineffective. So it seemed like a really great way to help students in the Prison Education Project enjoy class, as well as pick up some useful life skills along the way.
So I read the studies, and as Max has said, they indicate that there are no downsides to knowing about positive psychology, but plenty of possible upsides. So I suggested to Max that he send me some homework, and he did, and some of that's in front of you now.
And so within these resources, I referred Dr. Thomas to before starting on curriculum development. Of course, there's a plethora of academic literature as well, but these make it a little bit more accessible.
So I read that research on positive psychology and watched the videos so I could devise a course both applying the lessons to be learned from these experts' research and using that research as a subject for my students' analysis. As every critical writing instructor knows, a critical writing course teaches analysis, argument, and the incorporation of research into your thinking to come up to a final evolved thesis. You can analyze any piece of writing. You can make an argument about anything. And good critical thinking practice is attached to all forms of consideration of research and its incorporation into an argument. I wanted to match writing skill sets to positive psychology skill sets to see if we could build both at the same time and make both concepts easier to learn as a result of that collaboration.
And there are a ton of different ways to incorporate positive psychology into education, but our course focused on concepts and skill sets that set up a really strong foundation for future learning.
So this is what the resulting curriculum looked like. You'll see that it moves through each of the skill sets all writing classes go through: analysis, argument, and then into research and incorporation of that research. And it uses positive psychology research as the research that needs to be incorporated in our analysis of the text. Now, time constraints mean I can't take you through all the exercises, but I am going to talk you briefly through the exercises surrounding Hemingway's The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Elizabeth Bishop's poem, The Fish, so that you can see the main psychology skills we paired them with and get a taste of what we were doing in the classroom. The Hemingway short story has an epilogue telling the reader that Kilimanjaro is known by the Maasai as Nai, the house of God. Close to the western summit, there is a dried and frozen carcass of a leopard. No one has explained what the leopard was seeking at that altitude. Hemingway's story tells of Harry, a journalist writer come kept man, who is lying in a cot at the foot of Kilimanjaro, dying from a gangrene infection in his leg. We see Harry's life story through flashback scenes, in some of which Harry behaves badly, and in some of which he behaves nobly, particularly in his treatment of women and comrades in arms. At the end, Harry dies, but there is then what appears to be a final flashback in which Harry's voice describes flying away to the top of Kilimanjaro. Given the quote as the beginning of the story and the obvious analogies between Harry and the dead predator, The question I asked the students was to analyse the piece and tell me whether Harry had finally reached the house of God. We analysed Harry's good behaviour and his bad, with the class split about 50-50 as to whether or not he was redeemed at the end.
Next, we introduced the concept of character strengths, which are an empirical, vigorously measured way of thinking about positive personality characteristics developed by Martin Seligman and Chris Peterson. The key idea that we wanted to show here was twofold. First, everyone has character strengths, and that idea certainly takes some reinforcement, particularly in such a dehumanizing and difficult living environment. And second, that using character strengths can make difficult tasks more manageable and increase well-being and life satisfaction. So every student completed the values and actions character strength survey and then received a handout with their top signature strengths, which we then discuss. And students really enjoyed this activity and said that it was really nice, in fact, to have a little sheet of paper that described things about them that were inherently good and beneficial.
So since students were getting back their first analysis paper on Hemingway at this point, I was able to frame my comments around it about leaning into the strengths we'd identified in the test to solve the writing weaknesses that I'd identified.
So once that was in place, we then moved on to Martin Seligman's theory of well-being as an academic source to incorporate into our analysis. And under his theory, as we can see on the slide here, well-being is based on 5 measurable constructs: positive emotion, a sense of engagement, presence of positive relationships, a sense of meaning or life purpose, and a sense of accomplishment. And this was critical to establishing the idea that there are, in fact, things that people can do to improve their well-being under any circumstance.
And with that in place, we went back to thinking about Harry again and apply Seligman's well-being theory to support or counter the students' original theses. Harry's merciless self-criticism started to look somewhat different. Even those students who had felt that Harry was irredeemable started making comments demonstrating that they thought he was being hard on himself and was only human, etc. Harry became a much more complex character to them as they reevaluated those details they'd analysed before. Finally, we concluded with a group activity where students selected one element of the perma frame and applied it to an aspect of Harry. This led them to discover the extended metaphor of the snows of Kilimanjaro, which is Hemingway's own quest to find well-being and a sense of purpose in considering what it means to be a writer. So through this process, students had analysed a text to find their own interpretation of it, then learned and applied the well-being framework while they applied it to their text, and so joined in an academic conversation about the text. They'd covered all the common features of a writing course, but now they also knew about the theory of well-being. For the Bishop poem, we turn to the concept of gratitude.
So gratitude is one of the most studied concepts within positive psychology. And in fact, when trying to understand the greatest predictors of happy people, positive psychologists have consistently found that gratitude wins nearly every time. And teaching students what gratitude is and how it can be practiced regularly is a really great way to equip them with a lifelong tool for building happiness and life satisfaction. And typically, this looks like examining a complex situation and then extracting the elements that promote positive emotion.
Of course, what we're really doing is asking our students to reframe an idea using new information from an outside source, this time focusing on the positive. Analysis of Bishop's poem, The Fish, demonstrated this beautifully. The poem shows the speaker catching a fish and looking at all the ways in which it is large and nondescript, old and ugly. It doesn't fight her, but seems resigned to having been caught, despite bearing the scars and fish hooks of several other times it has been caught and has escaped. On closer examination, however, the speaker imagines the colours of its interior, its long life fighting, and sees it as a venerable, decorated warrior. All that colour imagery leads to her seeing a rainbow, rainbow, rainbow in the combination of the fish and her own position in the rusty boat. She sees the majesty of this fish and the wonder of its life as part of the universe. And with the religious symbolism of the rainbow as a sign of God's mercy, the reader gets to see that it is glorious in its own way. A tremendous fish, as she says at the beginning, and we understand why she lets the fish go.
Next, we moved on to vulnerability and courage. And I should say first that these topics were strategically placed later in the semester after Dr. Thomas had spent a considerable amount of time making the classroom a safe environment for sharing, because these topics require some sense of psychological safety. Vulnerability, as the quote on screen says, is an essential part of connection and learning. And I can say, as a student myself, it can be extremely uncomfortable to raise your hand, ask for help, or say that you don't understand something, because doing so requires showing some amount of vulnerability and courage. So for this unit, we talked about Dr. Brene Brown's research on vulnerability and encouraged students to write about being vulnerable and their experiences. We also then used this as a lens for analyzing our big text of the semester, Frankenstein.
Now, I don't have much time to talk at length about Frankenstein because there's just so much to say. Safe to say that the first thing we had to do was the positive reframing, as all the students' initial responses began by asking much the same thing in different words, the question you see on your screen. But we countered their doubts by reminding them that I knew all of their strengths and they had a test that proved them. Of course, the text itself answers this, as Shelley repeatedly emphasizes explicitly that all the creature seeks is love and community, as we all do. Vulnerability tied in beautifully because all of the tragedy of the tale would have been avoided if only Victor Frankenstein had been vulnerable and honest with the people that he loved.
Savoring was our last big topic, and it incorporates gratitude and positive reframing again. So much like the Bishop poem, the goal is to teach students how to find an experience and lean into and focus their attention on the pleasurable aspects of that experience. And one of the most effective ways to do that is keeping a gratitude journal where you describe 3 things that went well every single day. And this intervention has been shown in the research to actually increase well-being and life satisfaction when done regularly over the course of about 3 months.
And it's a great writing activity because it makes students write every day. I was very clear with them that I would look at their journals to see that they'd written in them, but I would not read them. We wanted the journals to be a safe space for writing to be something that the students did for themselves. I did tell them that there was an end of term assignment coming up where they would need this so that they would do the work.
And what we found was that when we let students share optionally or voluntarily, is that a lot of students actually had a similar daily practice of waking up early before things got loud, preparing a warm drink, and looking out past the fences at the same family of deer every morning. And you could see, as someone shared that, the small smile of recognition spread around the classroom amongst other people who did the exact same thing. So the exercise fostered not only well-being, but also community within the classroom.
And this led to their final exercise, a creative writing assignment where they had to look back at their What Went Well journal and tell a brief story of one thing that had made them happy that they were happy to share. Their goal was to make the reader feel how they had felt at the time. And this involved careful thinking about lexical sets and loaded language, honesty in writing, showing not telling, but the students very much enjoyed it. In preparation, I gave them a selection of Mary Oliver poems. I told them that the American population loved her work, but the critical academy not so much. Like the rest of America, they loved her work, so we went to have a look at why. As her fans know, Oliver's strength is in focusing on the natural world and the little things that she identifies honestly and authentically, is grateful for and savors. She's practically a poster child for the habits of well-being, and our analysis of her poems took us through those steps too. We see this in the first poem I have on the screen here, where she describes her dog Percy playing in the snow.
Positive psychology isn't fancy, it's not complicated, it's not expensive or difficult, but it can be really effective. I believe that it equips students with good skills that all higher education should provide, which is a toolbox for building a better life, one step at a time.
And most importantly, you don't have to be an expert to teach it. A lot of it is simply naming good teaching practice that you're doing already. We all want our students to be as joyful as Percy in the snow or Jerome on his graduation day in our program. As Oliver says in the final poem on the last slide, joy is not made to be a crumb. Well-being concepts are so easy to incorporate into writing analysis and argument and bring such richness to the students' understanding of their own learning and of the lessons in the text that this is well worth the effort. Now, we know we had to race through all of our materials, so links to the lesson plans and the research on which they're based will all be available on the WashU PEP website, and both of us are very happy to answer any emailed questions you might have about incorporating the material into a class. We're very grateful for your attention today.